filtering in.
Yeah, familiar faces.
Absolutely. Good morning if you are joining us from across Canada, and good afternoon to the folks who are joining us from abroad. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to make sure they're getting settled in and they know they're in the right place. My name is Stephanie Draker, and I am the program manager for Work and Culture, and I'll be supporting you and our co-host today on Zoom for our Collaborating with Artists Spotlight session. So welcome. So as we continue to get settled, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items. As you joined the meeting, you should have automatically been set to mute, and we'll just ask that you remain on mute until we open things up for questions. You can also type questions that you might have as we go into the chat, and I'll be monitoring that as we progress. Please consider keeping your camera on if possible. We know that this is probably not the only time this week that you've been on Zoom and might not be the last time today, but we do appreciate the level of connection that seeing your faces provides. And one suggestion that might help lessen the distraction of seeing your own face on the Zoom screen is to select Hide Self View if you haven't tried that already. You can do so from the top right corner of the Zoom screen. This session is being recorded and will be posted to our website after the fact if you'd like to revisit. And a live transcript is available for those to follow along through our Otter AI app. You can just click the little icon from the drop-down menu on the top left and follow along in another browser. And later on, I'll also activate the closed captioning via Zoom, but sometimes I find there can be a bit of a lag. Because we are joining together today from many different regions and organizations as a way of getting to know one another better and invite possible connections, opportunities for connections, consider changing your display name to show your organization name and your city and pronouns if you'd like. And we have a full agenda today. So we're going to be starting off with our presentations and then moving into our panel dialogue with our co-host today. And then we're saving the final 10-15 minutes or so at the end of this session for networking for those who would like to stay on and continue to get to know one another and our guest speakers. So I hope we have a good sense of what we're up to today. So as I mentioned, my name is Steph Draker, and I'm with Work and Culture. I'm also the lead on the festival's Learning Exchange program, or FLEX, as we've nicknamed it. And for those of you who are not familiar with Work and Culture, or many familiar with our popular job board, we are so much more than our job board. Work and Culture is a nonprofit art service organization with a focus on supporting the career development of people working in the arts. We span across all disciplines, all roles that make up the cultural workforce, and our focus is on Ontario, but by virtue of being able to deliver virtually, we are able to connect with people across many different traditional territories. However, our offices and our core team are located in Toronto, or Tekaronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and connect with others on it in any form, be it virtually and hopefully in person again soon. And since we're coming together from different locations today, I would invite each person in the session to consider the territories that they live and work on in order to reflect on the Indigenous life and history that surrounds us, even when we're on Zoom. So a bit more about FLEX for folks who are new to the program. So this is a pilot project and program that is generously funded by Canadian Heritage and supported by our partners at the City of Toronto, City of Greater Sudbury, Ontario Culture Days, Kingston Arts Council, and the Ottawa Festivals Network. It was inspired directly by the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the arts and heritage festivals, and also by a need expressed by this community for training around more effective collaborative practices. So presently, we have a cohort of 15 festivals who applied to participate in an intensive group learning experience over the next couple of months. And as part of this program, we also identified these spotlight sessions as a way to engage the main cohort, as well as participants from a wider network across Canada and internationally of colleagues, peers, and stakeholders who work with or alongside festivals. So that's a bit about the program. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Fanny Martin, to talk a bit more about the program format and then lead things off with our guests.
Thank you so much, Steph. And yeah, as we're getting settled in, it's great. We've got quite a few people coming from many places. I've spotted people across Ontario and beyond. So do let us know in the chat where you are, because we're here as well to network and to find connections with each other. This is what this program is really about. It's all about collaboration. And we can only collaborate if we know each other and if we know what we share, what values resonates, with each other, and what problems we want to solve as well, so that we can find common solutions to these. So the format we've adopted for this learning series is lots of different modules and lots of different approaches. We have core sessions, which is just for the cohort to work through some kind of practical exercises. We see it really as a studio time, where we're talking about stuff like leadership skills and how we relate to the theme of collaboration at large. The play sessions are focused on creating alliances and finding the links on the place-based dimension. So there's so much to be done there, and some places already have festival alliances. Sometimes, it's hard to get to know each other across disciplines or across scales. Festivals of very different sizes may not see the obvious benefits of actually collaborating together, but there is, again, so much to be gained there. And that's what we're trying to figure out with this program, is what are the tricks, what is enabling collaboration, so that we find this shared solution. And then we've got dropping sessions, which are thematic. So that's just to give you a little overview of where this session falls into. It's part of the format that we call Spotlight. We had one already about collaborating with peers, which you can watch the recording of. Today, we're talking about collaborating with artists. Lots to talk about. And our next one will be on the 13th of April. You can register for this one as well. And we will be collaborating with society. Very exciting. We'll be talking about community engagement. We'll be talking about environmental transition and many other big topics, which are really going outside it's the festivals looking out. And today we're more into, again, a studio practice kind of setting, because we're collaborating with artists in quite a few different ways, and we're going to hear from our hosts, our co-hosts. We're all co-hosting today. Yes, so Stephanie and myself are here today to make sure that the conversation is flowing amongst our wonderful co-hosts. We have Owais Lightwala, who is based in Toronto and who is a producer and professor. We have Steve Mead joining from Manchester in England, who is artistic director of the Manchester Jazz Festival. And there is also Helen Goodman in the room. Yes, hi Helen, who will be joining into the dialogue section. And Daniel Valtueña, who's joining from Madrid, who's a researcher and independent consultant, and will be taking the floor now to talk us through the program that he managed when he was at Queen's Council on the Arts. Over to you, Danielle. Let's get started with these short presentations, which are there to give you context about what these professionals, no professional here, but these experts in their field have been figuring out in that question of collaborating with artists. And we'll get later into what we mean by that as well, because always a good question, what do we mean? What do we mean collaborating with artists? Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Fanny, and thank you so much, Stephanie, for the introductions and for the invitation. And hello, everyone. My name is Daniel. I'm calling from Madrid, and I'm so happy to be here. I am going to share my screen, and I am going to talk today about a program that I used to manage at the Queen's Council on the Arts in New York. I assume that you can see the presentation full screen now, so if nobody says anything, I am going to keep going. And this is called the Artist Commissioning Program. So the first thing that, let me come back to the first one, okay, here. So first thing I have to say, the Queen's Council on the Arts is one of the 5 city councils in the city of New York. And these council serves local artists and art organizations in Queens, which is a very diverse and big borough. And first thing we have to think about, talking about the Artist Commissioning Program, is what is an art commission? Okay, and when I say art, I'm thinking about all disciplines, of course, visual arts, but also dance, music, and performing arts. So an art commission is when an individual or a group pays an artist to create a new work for a specific purpose. That's the traditional definition of an art commission. But in ACP at QCA, we thought about commissioning in a different way. And I really like what Marcus G, an ACP awardee in playwriting, said at some point when we were having conversation about the art commissioning process. So when we think about commissioning, when you think about commissioning, you usually think of rich people, right? Kings, queens, the Medici, people with money and privilege. But QCA, the Queen's Council on the Arts, wanted to put that power of commissioning into the hands of community members. And this is how we created the program. I'm having some issues with the presentation, so okay. We created the Artist Commissioning Program. So the Artist Commissioning Program that I'm going to refer as ACP is one of the programs that QCA had, and that basically wants to put the power of art commissioning into the people's hands. That is no longer for institutions or for experts to decide the art that is created, but it is up to local community leaders to decide the art that is created in the community. And we decided to do this and to launch this project with also this book that you can download by scanning that QR code, and I'm going to share through the chat later, which is a book that walks you through what I'm going to be presenting today, which is a methodology for everyone to be able to commission art in their communities, and for institutions and arts organizations to invite people to participate in the process of commissioning art, connecting artists with local people and making institutions more transparent and democratizing the access to culture. So the methodology overview behind this program is to structure in 3 sections. The first one is democratizing the art commissioning process, which is pretty much the hypothesis, what I was talking about before, right? Thinking that the art commissioning process should be something that should be accessible to everyone and not just to the privileged. The second part of this methodology is that we have to bust some myths and preconceptions about art commissioning in order for people to feel they can actually commission art, that they can collaborate with artists, since today we're talking about collaborating with artists. And the third part is a step-by-step guide to art commissioning that I'm going to walk you through in a minute. So the first part that we have to think about is democratizing the art commissioning process. And this is exactly what I was talking about. We need to think and we need to advocate for people to engage with the arts, not only as members of the audience or as people who buy tickets for shows, but also as people who participate in the process of art commissioning, that have a voice in order for their culture, their communities to be represented on the stage. Then we have to bust some myths and preconceptions about this very same process, because the reality is that people don't feel invited to commission art because they think they don't have the knowledge or the resources. And some of the myths that we tried to bust at the Queen's Council on the Arts through this program was that first, in order to commission art, people think that you have to be wealthy, right? That you have to have money, that you need to be such a big funder. But the reality is that arts organizations and public institutions should put the money into people's hands for them to decide the art that is created, that is showed, that is promoted. Then the second myth is that in order for you to commission art, in order for local people to commission art, they have to be culturally savvy, whatever that means. They have to be experts. And the reality is that we all are experts, right? We all have knowledge about different things, and we all can contribute toward communities. And maybe some people might not have a PhD in art history, but I'm sure that there are like teachers or activists or local businesses owners who knows really well their communities and which problems can be solved through the arts. And the third myth is that the process in order for people to commission art has to be complex, right? That is very difficult for an artist to commission an art by an art piece by an artist. And that's how we developed a step-by-step guide to art commissioning, which is basically a set of 8 steps in 8 questions that we would like arts institutions and public institutions and private as well as art organizations in different communities to follow in order to be able to invite people to commission art or to program art in their festivals, for example. So the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is that what is our goal when we want to commission art? What do we want to achieve? Then what do we want to commission? Do we want to commission an album? Do we want to commission a choreography? Then who do you want to commission? We are going to commission a specific artist. We are going to launch an open call. And then who will select the art, right? Is it going to be people that are part of our board? Is it going to be, local people in the community of the festival that we run? How are we going to fund the work? Probably it will be with private or public funding that we're going to put into people's hands to decide the projects that are going to be shown. How are we going to let the artists know about this commissioning process? How will the artist respond to the call? And then which project we are going to select. And in these 8 steps, we at the Queen's Council on the Arts wanted local people to feel that by answering these questions, they could follow the art commissioning process and actually commission a piece of art individually or collectively as part of an organization. But how do we did this at the Queen's Council on the Arts when I was the program manager there? So first, we launched an open call for art commissioners, and everyone in the borough in Queens could apply to become an art commissioner, could apply to be an art commissioner and to decide the projects that were going to be funded by the Queen's Council on the Arts, and also get paid for it. We wanted to pay the art commissioners a little bit more, and we tried, but the important thing is that we honor people's labor, because this is also some a kind of labor. So we launched this open call for art commissioners where everyone could apply with no expertise whatsoever, just showing that they had an interest in contributing to the community through the arts. And we selected these 5 wonderful art commissioners: Helen, Manuela, Sophie, Christy, and Jacqueline, who met and decided the projects that the Queen's Council on the Arts funded eventually. At the same time, we launched an open call for projects. We focused on choreography and dance projects because it was a mandate from our funder. And we received different applications from different projects within the borough. And then the art commissioners met. The Queen's Council on the Arts facilitated the meetings and the trainings for them to meet, but it was them who decided the projects that were funded at the end. And here you can see the 8 projects, the 8 artists that were funded, all of them dance and choreography projects. And what is interesting to see is that when you let people decide the projects that are funded, when you let normal people decide the art that is commissioned, stories and people that are funded started to change. You see how there are projects about mental health awareness, about the Armenian genocide, about coming out as a queer people of color. And by enabling local community members to decide the art that is created within the community, then art starts to be more and more meaningful for the community, because they might not have, again, an MFA or a PhD in art history, but they know what is important for the community. And some stories, some untold stories start to be told and start to be present within the community, basically trying to make the art world more diverse and more accessible to everyone and more meaningful for people in the community. And I'm going to finish with this. This, of course, contributes to making art more meaningful in the community, and artists start to be supported by local community members. And I think that's a way to enrich the artistic and cultural environments in our different communities, because then it's also up to local people to be part of the network of support for artists. And these, I think, through this program, which is very replicable, and it can be replicated in different formats. And I'm now working towards that in different places as an independent consultant. I think will contribute to foster collaboration with artists that are not just, again, programming them or commissioning them from the institution, but actually and enabling them to answer to the challenges that different communities in different parts of the world have. So I am now going to stop, and I'm going to pass it to Steve, and I will be more than happy to continue with the conversation later and to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session from me, Steve Mead, and I can see Fanny very clearly on my screen, and although Fanny is absolutely lovely to look at, I'm just wondering why. But anyway, though, Daniel, that was really fascinating, and I just wanted to, well, I think we will pick up on a few points actually as we go through the session, because there's so many parallels with some of the things that I'm going to be talking about as well with our festival. And also, just as Stephanie, I think Fanny mentioned at the outset, I have got a colleague here. Helen is here, the gorgeous Helen, who's waving now. But just during this presentation, it's just going to be me, unfortunately, that you're hearing from. Helen pinned me down to the floor and tickled me until I agreed to do the presentation on my own. So we'll open up the discussion afterwards, and Helen will be there for that. But if I just get my presentation up and running onto the screen for you, as I said, where are we from the beginning? So, well, there you go, that's me. I'm hoping you can see and hear me, and off we go. So MJF stands for Manchester Jazz Festival. It's a that's what it says on the tin, really. It's a festival, and it's been going for about 27 years. Some of the points that I'm going to be talking about really stem from our vision, and I thought I'd share that with you. If you open our business plan on the first page, you'll see this vision statement shouting rather noisily at you, and it's that we're the go-to UK opportunity for contemporary jazz artists to develop their practice and for audiences to experience and appreciate new music. But hey, who the hell reads business plans, eh? So the thing about that vision is I prefer to translate it for the artists and the audiences that come and experience the festival. And the way I like to view that is more along the lines of a place where artists can find themselves and audiences lose themselves. It's still about the art and the artists and the audience experience. It's about the merging of those two areas of work for us in the festival team, and I know for a lot of you too as well. I know there's a lot of festival organisers in the audience today. Fanny asked me to just give you a few highlights and a few kind of who we are, just in a nutshell really about the organisation. So it was founded in '96 critically by artists and enthusiasts. So it's grown from the ground up. No one asked us to do it. We weren't given a bunch of money and said, we need a festival, can you do one? It actually came from the sector, from the community that were already working in that field. It's Manchester's longest running festival. It is now, it wasn't when it started, but so it's now the longest running festival in Manchester. Typically you can see the scale of it there in terms of the number of artists, venues and audience numbers. Our priority is really to champion the Northern UK artists that are working in the music, as well as some national and international content, and I'll come on to talk about why shortly. It's a very a broad program, a lot of crossover music, but critically, again, mostly new and original work, and a lot of premieres of commissions of the like that Daniel's just been talking about, and collaborations and site-specific work as well, and some international debuts. Yes, and I'm really keen on it's one of those things where it's called a jazz festival. I don't actually like the term jazz. I don't like having that genre. So I try and kind of bust it every year really, and try and put a program together that dissolves the genre and breaks down musical boundaries. And it also celebrates place. I'm not sure how much you know about England and the UK, but Manchester's kind of maybe a second or a third city. And Manchester does those things that second or third cities do. It gets really proud, independent, a bit grumpy about not being the main city. And I think we tie into that quite accurately. We actually make a point of celebrating the local scene and nurturing it here to make it a place where artists can work and live, and audiences don't have to travel to the capital to experience really high quality culture. I also thought it was, I was actually thinking about what do we do well? What are we best at? But the trouble with being best at something is that someone else can always come along and be better than you. So I thought, well, instead, let's look at some of the things that we did first, some of the things we perhaps think we've pioneered. That way, no one can come along and do it first, then, can they? So some of the things we are indisputably first at have been the first festival to podcast in the UK, first one to launch a commissioning scheme, first to use on-stage recyclable water bottles. It's a big passion of ours. Also won the only UK festival to win the Europe Jazz Network Award for adventurous programming. Really quietly proud about that. We've also been the first to sign up to a couple of national and international pledges, which you may know about. Key Change, which is a kind of global initiative to rebalance the gender on our festival stages, and also Black Lives in Music. We're a founder member of that organisation. I think they're just working in the UK at the moment, but we're really proud to be part of that. And we're also, during lockdown, we were the first festival to stage some live performances, albeit without an audience. And then at the very end of lockdown, the first festival to do a live gig with a live audience. And this is the thing I'm most proud of, with the first festival to be invited to take part in the Flex Spotlight session from the UK. Very exciting, prestigious achievement, that is. So Fanny and Steph wanted me to talk about collaborating with artists. And I wanted to start really with talking about the need and identifying the need, because I think that's really the route to its success. As I'm talking about our cornerstones, the aims of the organisation are all about original work and celebrating locality and being inclusive as well. You saw some of those firsts that we did on the previous slide. They're all there because they're part of our core values as well. But after a while, if you've been running a festival for a number of years, you get settled into some things, don't you? You start to notice some bad habits and perhaps laziness, and you start to notice some trends happening that you think, hang on a minute, this isn't quite right. I'm not quite happy with how this is going. And the main ones that started to concern me were really about the artist base, not being as inclusive and diverse as I wanted it to be. For some reason, we were speaking to what ended up being quite a kind of narrow circle of artists. So I thought about making some interventions to enable a wider pool of artists to be included in the programme, but at the same time keeping us on mission. And what we identified within the sector was specifically some gaps in how artists were given the opportunity and the platform to develop new work, especially when they're coming from specific groups. Now, some of you actually might recognise some of these groupings of people because you may have encountered similar problems. Certainly artists working at the grassroots level often felt excluded. Those artists working outside of formal education routes, especially artists from culturally diverse backgrounds. And in jazz, we've had a big problem with female instrumentalists being nurtured into the industry. And also artists in remote and rural locations who quite often feel excluded from events in the city. So what we did was we set about devising support programs that actually built upon individual artist need rather than approaching it through running a set course that we then channeled artists through. So everything we do is very bespoke. It's tailored to individual artists. And we also were very careful to provide an offer to artists that wasn't replicated elsewhere. And that gave us some really strong leverage with funders because we were doing things that other people, other organisations weren't getting funded to do. And of course, we've run them, a lot of them, for several years now. We've been able to refine them over time and gather some really healthy funding towards making them happen. And here's a few of them. MJF Originals is our scheme for commissioning new work. We've also got a program called Introduces, which is about young regional talent, giving them their first gig. One that Helen and I work on together, we're really proud of this one, Hot House. It's a diversity-driven artist development program over about 6 months to help artists overcome barriers to develop new work. Another program which is a bit like Hot House but at a junior level and more localized for 18 to 25s to bring improvisation into their music for the first time. And we've also got a couple of things that we're working on, trying to get a program together to help the behind the scenes people in the industries and not just the artists, the doers, the producers and the people who work invisibly in the arts. And we're also working on a European collaboration with some of our partners from the EJN on an exchange program as well. Now, I think Helen will talk later a lot about this, but what we found is when we're working and collaborating with artists on these programs, the taking time and investing effort into recruitment and selection is absolutely critical, because otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time if you don't get this stage right, if you don't get it spot on. It does take a lot of legwork putting in the effort to get here, but if you approach it as an enabler, and this is how we approach it, that you're giving artists a confidence to dream, to do, and to dare, and you look at your role as a festival, as an organisation, as a producer, a producing company. It's if you, I don't know, maybe take a humble step and think of yourself as an invisible enabler, and make the artist the star of the show. It makes everything a lot clearer and a lot easier to deliver. All our artist opportunities are open calls, so anyone can apply. But even then, what we found is that open call isn't quite enough to guarantee success. So we have to do even more work to get the right artists. How do we do that? Well, we do a couple of things. We make a lot of noise about our artistic priorities, so people know what we're about at the outset. We're really open about how we arrive at decisions and process, because I think that helps people understand why they might not be successful. We take the time in recruitment. Sometimes we spend an hour, possibly more, with each individual artist before we determine whether they're right for a scheme. And that adds up, as you can calculate yourself. We try and offer feedback if people don't get through. And most importantly, we try and create a level playing field between us, the provider, and the artist as well. And of course, artists don't necessarily hear about what we do. They don't just come to us naturally. We have to put the effort into marketing the opportunities. And it takes time to seek artists out and to be trusted and to find some common ground as well. But I think at the root of it, as I was saying at the beginning, identifying a need in your sector has been critical to our success, because we've then been able to fill that gap by providing an opportunity for artists and also fundraise on the back of that identified need. And we've seen quite a few years of good results. And I mean, even this year, the two commissioned works that we're producing in the festival are both by women, which is great. We produced 4 digital commissions last year. You can see the demographics of the artists that are coming through now. And equally on our Hot House program, it's made a really big difference to the types of people who are coming through into the workforce. And I'm not sure if you've got this in Canada yet, but this thing about socioeconomic background, it's one of what we call the protected characteristics in the UK, which is it's one of the demographics that are measured in terms of diversity, but it actually takes account of your upbringing and your sort of social, your class status and your social status. I can go into more detail about that during the session if it's interesting to you. And yeah, you can see how long we spend even giving feedback. I mean, just doing 6 sessions, that takes a day of your time. So it's quite hard work, but this is what you have to do to win trust of artists, to get them engaged and make a meaningful difference. And here's some quotes from some of the artists who have been through. Okay. It's also worth thinking about how you measure success as well. How do we know we're successful? And really, I mean, what on earth is success? I don't know if you have any sort of measurements for defining success. A couple of vaguely amusing ones that I like to kind of look at. Success is finding something you like doing and getting someone else to pay for it. That's a good one. I really like this one. It's about learning how to manage your disappointments when you don't get what you want. That's lovely, that one. And even for most of us, probably just getting to the end of something in one piece without having a breakdown. I think that is a success in itself sometimes, isn't it? And just to give you a couple of tips, things that I've learned, Helen and I can probably share some of these, when you're trying to work in these types of programs, is remember to take risks. If you're funded, we're lucky enough to be funded. Funders like funding you to take risks. You know, they want to see you being confident enough to get something wrong and then learn from it. And surround yourself with people who are much better than you are. I love working with Helen because she's so much better than I am at so many things. Working with people like Fanny in the past has been amazing. So do try and find those amazing people that really inspire you and just plonk yourself in the middle of them. It's amazing what you can learn from others. And my final tip, which I'm not going to read out, I just love the ambiguity of it. So read it for yourself and take what you will from that message. Now, if we do get our work right, I think going back to what I was talking about in terms of how we view our organisation, the art of successfully collaborating with artists, and that is to say enabling others to shine, is really the art of us becoming invisible. And that is me. There's a film in this presentation which is only about a minute long. We won't show it now, but I think Fanny and Stephanie are going to forward this to you afterwards. You can click through that link and just see a little film of last year's festival, which gives you a picture of how we work and what we do, and some of the audiences experiencing it. So thanks so much for your attention. Sorry if I overran a little bit, but I'm going to hand back to, no, I'm not going to hand back. I think I'm going to hand on to our next amazing guest, who is the wonderful Owais, who you may know. He's our local translator, and he's coming thick and fast at you. Owais, are you there to take over from me?
I'm here and ready for action. That was the best use of a PowerPoint transition I've ever seen in my 32 years of existence. Thankfully, I don't have to do language translation, and hopefully, I mean, those presentations are really beautifully articulated. I'll apologize to our audience that I wasn't given the opportunity to present as coherent of a presentation. I'm responding, so I'm going to ramble through my responses that I just came up with in real time. So it won't be as slick as what you heard from Steve and Daniel. For those of you who don't know me, because I do see some familiar names and some unfamiliar ones, these days I'm a professor at the university formerly known as Ryerson, teaching, producing, and arts management to Gen Z. But until very recently, I was working with the great folks at Why Not Theater, where I was a producer and had been for the last decade, basically, and spent a lot of time thinking about some of the questions you guys are asking, which is, how do we serve artists? How do we serve communities? How do we do things better? How do we take risks? And how do we fail in more interesting ways to solve some of these challenges? And a lot of the creativity and the approaches and the kind of values, I think, that I'm hearing, implicit values in what both of you spoke to, really resonates with at least the work that that I was doing with Why Not, that Why Not was interested in, and I think many people in the sector are resonating with right now or thinking about. The biggest word that I kind of wrote down was this idea of access. Feels like a thing that basically both of you are trying to, or both your organizations were trying to work at. In your case, Steve, the access for artists who have not previously seen themselves as jazz musicians or seen jazz as an industry for them to participate in. And Daniel, from your perspective, access for both the art commissioners who would never see that label. There's a thing that somebody said recently that I think is true for so many careers in our sector, which is nobody plays producer when they're a kid. Like nobody plays arts administrator, nobody plays curator. They pretend to be an actor or they pretend to be a singer. And we don't really have childhood role models or aspirational games that lead towards these very, very vital roles in the industry and in the sector towards actually making the work happen. So that I think is interesting to enable that as a pathway, especially for people who don't have the privilege and the entitlement to just say, I just want to do this. Like the number of rich people that I see, just tangent because I'm allowed to ramble, the number of rich people that I just see like who can just say I'm a curator because I have the money to buy without having any of the other things you mentioned, like cultural savvy or understanding of complexity, or even really a passion for art, I think is interesting, right? You can basically buy your way out of knowledge if you have enough privilege. So the question comes back to me of like access is really the fundamental problem that you were trying to address, and collaborating with artists in a different way is to try and solve this problem of access, and access for artists, access for the communities that are interacting with the art, and access for people who are not artists, but artists adjacent in making that art happen. The interesting thing about the difference in approaches, that also something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, struggling with Why Not and the journey we took. So Why Not, for those of you who don't know, does this thing called the Riser Project, which was an initiative that we created specifically around trying to help also provide access to artists to production opportunities that didn't have that pathway available to them, because producing performance is really expensive and difficult for the obvious reasons. And what we struggled with the whole time, and probably they're still struggling to this day with it, is the balance between replicability and bespokeness. And both of you kind of went into different directions. Daniel, your program sounds like, in fact, you have a guide for how we can do this, and other places can take it and package it and move it and apply it. And Steve, it feels like the secret sauce of your innovations is not to package, not to make it a recipe, and the taking just a lot of time to be bespoke. And I think that tension is interesting because, you know, you mentioned risk taking at the funder level and an appetite for that. And my experience is actually, in reality, while funders want the idea of risk, what they struggle with is the idea of not being able to replicate things, not being able to standardize, not being able to evaluate in very clear metrics is actually very challenging. And I don't want to throw funders under the bus for that being something that's like makes them dumb. I think it's a legitimate structural challenge of like, how do you create structure around something that is just needs to be individual response, or needs to be responsive and reactive in a way that as soon as you structurize or standardize, it creates new inaccessibility, it creates new exclusions, it creates new limitations and new barriers for people, which I think is also necessary. Like we can't have, and I know because we tried, we really tried it, Why Not, to just be bespoke all the time. And that really for us, for the local translation part that I'm supposed to be doing, for those of you who know the Theater Center, myself and Ravi and Kelly and the founding people at Why Not, we grew up at the Theater Center, which is known for its residency program. It's a legendary residency program where lots and lots of great Canadian artists have worked. And the thing that makes that program so great is that they basically kind of say, radical generosity, what do you need? And it's a long-term, very deep, supportive, collaborative process. It's super, super hard to do though. And it's really taxing for them and taxing for the organization and taxing for any organization like Why Not, who was inspired by that and was like, yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to be there for the artists to whatever end they they need. And one question that I'm hoping we can get into is like, where's the limits of generosity? How do you set good, healthy boundaries for yourself, for your organization, for the artist? An idea that was coming to mind as you were talking that I've also reflected on is going from, because one of the prompts of the session was going from presenting mindset to producing mindset. And I feel like the difference there, because I've done both, is going from being friends with somebody to being a roommate. And like, you know, the saying, like, if you really want to get to know somebody, live with them. And the amount of difficulties that can come up in a long-term deep collaboration, and the trust required, and the like conflict that is going to be inevitable between people of different needs and personalities. That's one of the hardest things about producing, that is not actually about funding models and grants and marketing. It's like a much softer, harder to grasp and like name problem of where presenting actually is a little bit easier because the relationship is a bit shorter term, and you don't need to get as invested in their the entirety of their being, and their entire lives and careers don't depend on you in necessarily the same way. I don't know how much more time I should ramble here. Fanny, can you just give me a visual cue? Because I know we're a little over our original scheduled time.
Oh, yes. I mean, we're all in the fog today, us in Toronto, and I realized I did a terrible job at introducing you always as the local translator, because I don't know, I just skipped through, assuming that we did it last time, so everybody knows. Thank you so much for bringing everything into context. That is the point of having you here. Let's move into the dialogue now, because we can continue to weave, in and out of each other's concepts, experiments. I think this is what we're really getting into now. We've got a few comments in the chat saying, want to hear more about this, I want to hear more about that. Do please let us know what is taking your curiosity here, because the session is for you, right? It's not for Steve Owais, Daniel and Helen. It's really for you in the room to dig further and to take what you need from all this expertise and people who've, done the failed experiments basically before you. Maybe I'll just get started with, let's start at the beginning, right? I'm really curious about, because you've all done these experiments, how does it feel the first time? You felt the need, there's a call somehow, like the sector is calling, we need to have more artists, we need a difference to happen, we need change to happen. How do you get going with this first structure, this first experiment, and how do you then bounce back from the learnings and the failings? And I open the floor to all of you, and just take it as it comes if you have something to share, and we want to hear from all of you.
I can jump in. Sorry, Helen, do you want to start? Okay. I think I really like that question, because it's very much also connected to somewhat that really stood out to me during Steve's presentation, which is the idea that an open call is really open to everyone, right? I took notes, and Steve was saying that's not enough. An open call is not open to everyone, and we have been pretending that it is, that because it's open to everyone and everyone can apply, and we create this kind of invitations for everyone to share their ideas, we are opening the access to everyone. And access was a word that was also part of the chat, and people were interested in that. And we know now that that's not true, that there are so many barriers, and people, even if something is open, there are some invisible doors for the privileged ones that we don't see, but that others see. I'll give you a very simple example that is connected to your question, Fanny. Queens is a very, very diverse world, and not everyone speaks English in the world. So if our open calls are in English, that doesn't mean that they are really open, because people cannot read them, or they need to ask someone to translate them for them. And that implies, people might feel ashamed, or they might not have the resources or the connections, because their communities don't speak English either. So we are putting somehow some barriers in front of people when we think we are like opening. So it is important to think about that. And I think that's related to your question, because that's the rationale behind ACP, behind the Artist Commissioning Program. So for example, the Queen's Council on the Arts was seeing how most of the applications that the Queen's Council on the Arts was getting for other programs, other grants programs and residency programs were coming from specific boroughs that tend to be the most privileged ones and for certain communities, and that there were certain communities that were really big in terms of population within the borough that were not represented in our data, that they were not there while they are actually there. So of course there was a gap, a gap between the borough and the art that the Queen's Council on the Arts was awarding and was fostering. So this program started as a way for people in the community to tell us what we had to do and what it needed to be done in order for the Queen's Council on the Arts, which is a council which works towards people in the borough and advocates for their rights and for the rights in terms of artistic access, for us to know how to do that. So I think that's something that's a rationale behind it, and we have failed in so many ways because of course it's difficult to achieve everything when you don't have all the resources that you would like to, or when you start seeing how the more you get into the problem, the more complex it gets, and the more nuances you see. So I will stop there, and Helen wanted to say something about it. So well, we can continue with the conversation, of course.
Yeah, hi everyone. I suppose your question was, how does it feel to start something? And I've been with the Jazz Festival for about 3 years now, and over that time we've introduced a new program called Soundcheck. And the program was designed to get young people in Manchester creating jazz for the first time. So it was kind of looking at, artists that are already doing rock or like electro or all sorts of different things, and saying, come to the jazz club, come and join us and learn improvisation. So that was kind of the strategy, and we set up the program as a response to also local funding call out, and then we designed it and everything, and we launched it, and then COVID hit. So what was supposed to be an in-person program all of a sudden had to be delivered online. So it became then an 8-week program, and it was good. The challenge was good because it allowed us to bring in a national cohort of industry professionals and things that we hadn't really thought about before. And yeah, it worked very well. And we've just done the second round, and I think what's important there was that we really listened to the artists a lot the first time round and did lots of evaluation. And one of the things that came out of it was that they wanted to not just be online but meet in person. So for me, Steve, I'm sure you'll agree, but for me the best feeling there was watching these 11 young people, most of which who have never improvised before, all of a sudden on stage together, jamming and doing creating work out of nothing. And it was just amazing, and they're still connected together. So for me, it was a bit of a rush, really, personally, to feel like we had coordinated a bit of a movement within Manchester to generate a new scene. Really, it only cost us like £8,000 to do it. It was very cheap. So yeah, how did it feel? It feels fantastic. I don't know, Steve, that's my example. I'm sure you have lots more.
I don't know, I think it does feel great. And that moment that you described, Helen, when we witnessed 11 people who had never even met in the flesh, like after about 2 hours, be giving a 20-minute performance. There wasn't an audience, it was just Helen and me in the audience crying with disbelief at what they'd achieved, really. But I guess the thing about feeling good about it is it's probably a signal that you're doing it right, because it's having an impact on you as an organizer. It's totally not the reason we're doing it, but if the byproduct is actually, oh wow, that we didn't realize that that could happen to all these people, that they'd be impacted in this way. So it was another metric, if you like. Our response, our emotional response to their engagement was a really useful metric to measure that we got something or one part of it right. And therefore we're going to do that bit again, and just so we can feel good about it for a third time.
But that is bringing nuances of, the complexification somehow of, the more you know, the more you need to solve in some ways, the more barriers you start removing, the more you see, or you see that they're not completely removed. Like, does it ever feel satisfactory? And perhaps another way to think about it is what's the time span for change to happen and to become perhaps, like its own, virtuous cycle.
This is something that I wrote down, Fanny. It's really interesting you said that. The first thing I wrote down when you asked the question was about how do you measure outcomes? Because often what happens is we invest, particularly with Hot House, in our artists over a 6-month period, but we don't see the benefits of the work that we've done 2, 3, 4 years later. Because we're there for the long run. We're there to support something that they need to overcome personally, or we help with the seed of the idea, but it doesn't become a product properly for a number of years. So I think that's really interesting, thinking about how funders measure outcomes, but also how we track it as an organization. And Daniel, I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the complexity. The more you learn, the bigger the job you have, really.
Yeah, because of course feeling good about it is a symptom of knowing that things are getting the right way. But also I would add that sometimes when you're doing things right, you might feel uncomfortable, or you might feel challenged by your constituents. Because in our case, for example, we were feeling really bad as an organization because we were realizing all the things that we had not been doing in the past. And our constituents, the artists in the community, were telling us. We opened the door for them to tell us. And for example, the ACP program, the Artist Commissioning Program, aims to bring artists that sometimes are not funded or who don't receive grants. So sometimes these artists are not used to the conventions of working in privileged artistic environments. And that puts arts administrators in a very uncomfortable position because you are out of your comfort zone. And sometimes feeling, bad or feeling challenged and uncomfortable is also a symptom or a sign that you are doing things in the right way. It might sound, paradoxical, but it is like that, because then you open the door for people that might not like you, but in our case, we manage public dollars, and that it is important that everyone has access to that. So I think that's also a symptom of doing things right, feeling challenged and feeling uncomfortable about and knowing that you have not done things perfectly in the past. I wanted to add that to what Steve was saying before.
Yeah. You're not selling it very well, Danielle, with all these feelings of guilt and, I wonder.
Well, I mean, I think I'm very aware of the privileges I have, which of course it's not an excuse. And I think everyone in the room also works towards the same goal. So, I mean, of course, it comes with a lot of challenges when you're working as an organization, but I think it's the right way to go if we really want to open the goals and the doors.
I really don't think it's a negative. I think it's more about the sensitivity and of listening to people and then responding with care. And that's kind of everything that runs through everything that Steve and I do. The problem with that is it's very emotional for us, and it takes a lot of time to be really sensitive. But I think we see the best outcomes when we do that. And it is a guilt, but it's more I'd say it's more sensitivity than a guilt for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder always if you have also thoughts on this question of cycle and funding, especially for what concerns us in Ontario and Canada at large. How do we manage these funding expectations, the outcomes, the time it takes to show that change is needed and is happening?
Yeah, I think I don't know, maybe this is a universal phenomenon, but my experience from based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, at every level that I just mentioned, because we have funding from municipal, provincial, and federal, is generally prove it first, and then we will fund the risk after, once you've proven that the risk is not risky, which is a little bit backwards, I find. Like, I find it very counterintuitive that they want to fund risks all the time. But like, if you read, you pick your innovation fund and it's always about like scaling up things that have been proven to work somewhere. I'm like, what did you risk? Like, what is the actual, and in our own experience with Riser, the only way that was possible is TAC did have Open Door Grant, which was at the time quite revolutionary in that it was the first time we had a funding opportunity, at least in my lifetime, and I realized that maybe there was things before I existed that were better. It was the first time where there was a grantor that was going, "What do you want to do? We haven't decided what the right answers are. We are not actually the experts. What do you want to do that's going to be innovative and going to improve something in the sector? Just pitch us something." And that was exactly what we needed at the time, because we didn't even know. In fact, the name Riser didn't exist for the first 2 years of the project. Like, we had terrible names for this thing because we were still trying to figure out one name was Intergenerational Collaborative Producing Cooperative or something, like really, really awful branding, because we had no idea what we were actually, we hadn't figured out the answer. We just knew that there was a problem. And so we were like intuitively experimenting, trying things. We were like back kind of channeling into project grants, to try and get funding to do this thing. But it was very much responsive to the same things, our colleagues internationally are mentioning, is what is the urgent need in the community that is telling us that this is an urgent need, and how can we try and make something happen there? And then a few years later, we figured out, oh, this is a consistent problem. There is a kind of structural solution to some extent, and we can systematize it. And then suddenly it's like raining money. But first you have to prove it. And that, I think, is a real challenge and again, not all funders are the same, and not all people inside funding institutions are the same, but as much as possible, I think the appetite for taking the risk on an idea that is solving the right problem, even if it's not proven, even if we don't actually know what the outcome is. I would say Canadian funders, if they heard Steve say, yeah, we just feel good about this, is like probably going to be a challenge for them, because they're not used to that. They're used to, can we count it? Can we count the success? And that is hard in innovation. I think it's really, really, it's really a volume game of like, I don't know how many tries. Actually, Daniel, I'm curious, how many tries did it take to get to the artist commissioning program in terms of that model and that idea being so like clear as a structure, and you've really thought out all the pieces? Because it doesn't strike me as something that like someone just had a meeting on a Monday morning and they were like, great, let's do it.
I wasn't there when the program started, but it was possible because it was originally funded by a private foundation that funded another program at the Queen's Council on the Arts. So there was a very intense and a very good relationship between the Queen's Council on the Arts and this private foundation, to the point that when the executive director at the point pitched this idea to this foundation, they said yes, because they somehow trusted already the organization. And because this is something that we were discussing the other day in the prep meeting, which is how, at least in the US, especially with, Trump and everything that was happening in the last few years, private foundations wanted to started to feel that the communities they serve, didn't trust them anymore, or they had to show more that they actually care for the arts or the humanities in our case. So, the executive director at the time was really clear about the idea that this program is not about the funders in the picture. And with that kind of statement, of course, you are not going to get some funders. Some funders don't want that. They want to be in the picture. But there are some others that are actually working towards that goal. And actually, for example, the Mertz Goodman Foundation, which is the foundation that is currently working with us, with the Queen's Council on the Arts now in this program, really wanted to put that that spotlight in the community members and not being them, because they felt that by somehow, of course, it's not like they are not interested in gaining some kind of accountability, but it is a different way of gaining trust from the community, somehow focusing on others rather than being them, the ones that are, the important ones. So it was because there was a previous relationship with this funder, and also, funders can. There are so many types of funders. So maybe, the goal of ACP was to, and we are. The Queen's Council on the Arts was working towards that goal. We wanted to somehow prototype this model for it to be applied then in big organizations and in public institutions to incorporate this kind of model, or not having just panel of experts, but also local community members. So some people like that, but definitely it has to be very explained to funders.
I was just going to come back on that, because I think you mentioned that amazing word of trust there, Daniel, and that sort of and being trusted by a funder to deliver something is a key part of us actually being able to work, isn't it? And I think there's a really brilliant question that came in earlier before the session from, I think it was Eva, working in Toronto, who was asking about how do you get a funder on board to support a program without knowing who the artists are that you're going to support. How do you kind of get their initial trust to do that? And I was so pleased someone asked that, because that's something that I think we probably all go through, and certainly we went through at the beginning of our programs. And I think there's also an extent to which funders they're kind of catching up with the art a lot of the time. They're waiting for the sector to develop, and then they introduce a response to it through various schemes. And I remember, I think, 2008, 2009, when we did want to launch, we wanted to make our commissioning scheme a central part of our core budget, rather than have to keep applying for projects and knowing who the artists are. We wanted long-term funding to embed within the organisation so that we could future plan, and we didn't have to keep telling the funders what we were going to do first before we were going to get the money. And it was a nightmare trying to get them on board with committing funds, not knowing who the artists are. In the end, what I did was, the Arts Council relationship manager asked me to go away and write a policy for commissioning, which had to be approved by our board, and it had to have really clear processes in it, all the decision metrics that we were going to go through to appoint an artist. So this is what I did. I went away and wrote a commissioning policy. The board signed it off, and in fact we devised 10 assessment metrics for each proposal, and still use a lot of those today, to be honest. And I took that back to the Arts Council, and then they were happy with that. Once they were reassured that we got a process and we weren't just all touchy-feely about it. We had something rigorous, and we knew how we were going to measure success. Then they shut up and let us get on with it, and we've been doing that every year since. What's really interesting is that then 5 years later, the Arts Council start talking about, oh yeah, we want to see organisations commissioning work and doing this, and I'm thinking, well, crumbs, why didn't you do that 10 years ago when I was banging away at your door trying to get you to commission work? So that's a good example of a funder catching up with the sector, and then it becoming a core part of what they support right across the arts. If you now apply to be an organisation in England, an NPO, a regularly funded organisation, you have to look at commissioning work. Amazing, 10 years ago they were just slamming the door in our faces, so to speak.
Speaking of commissioning, maybe we can bounce back and look into another question that came through the chat, which was addressed to Daniel, but I think we can really expand this to the full wonderful panel, which is about selection. So the question is, Daniel, can you share in the artist commissioners, how the artist commissioners themselves are selected? The feedback that you mentioned from artists and community members factor in how the commissioners are chosen. And maybe if we start with you, Danielle, we can also weave into Owais, when you worked on the Riser program, who's got the power to select? And in Daniel's case, it's interesting because who selects the selectors as well?
Exactly. I mean, that's a challenge because in our case, and I'm not proud to say this, but it was the Queen's Council on the Arts who selected the art commissioners. It was, of course, we worked with our network because the Queen's Council on the Arts was founded in the 60s. So we, QCA is an organization that is connected to the borough in a very meaningful and pleasant way. But when we launched the open call for art commissioners to apply to become an art commissioner, at the end of the day, it was us looking at the applications because the reality was that then it's like it's impossible to solve, or maybe you can let me know if you have any kind of solution. But if you create a panel to select the art commissioners, who select the panel, and then you start like going from one panel to another until you do anything. But for us, for example, it was important that the application wasn't a formal application, that they didn't feel like a grant application or a job application, that we were more interested about knowing these people as people rather than as experts or as people who think in the arts in a very professional way. And of course, we got a lot of applications from people working in the arts because they are part of the network and they know the Queen's Council on the Arts, previous collaborators. But it was good because it was also up to us to have a more balanced cohort of art commissioners who were connected to the arts, but in different ways, both working professionally in the arts, but also, for example, teaching arts in a public high school or things like that. And for us, it was important that the application in itself wasn't, a CV or a more like a statement of purpose, but more like, what do you want to contribute? Also, we offer the application in different languages, Spanish, Mandarin, and English, because are the three main languages spoken in Queens, even though, of course, we couldn't do them in all of them. And we tried to build an application that was open to everyone. And of course, that didn't happen. Of course, we couldn't reach to some people, and that's something that has been a challenge throughout the program. First, because the word art commissioner is not that transparent. Sometimes people, they even know what it means. At the beginning of the program, it was called art producer, but then it gets confused because people think it is, the artist in itself. And they always think that it's a professional application, and it is important for the organization to mediate with the communities. But of course, we all know that organizations are not limitless, that we have an amount of resources, human resources, and that it is sometimes difficult. But it's true that in our case, for example, year by year, we were looking at our numbers and we were seeing the kind of people that were applying and where they were coming from in terms of the different neighborhoods within the borough. And we, for example, in the consecutive open calls, we were focusing on our partners in these boroughs in order to, to try to focus in terms of communication in these boroughs, so people in the underrepresented boroughs could apply and join. And that was not a selection criteria, but it was important for us that the people from different backgrounds, including the neighborhood, but also in terms of race, gender, economic class, etc., were represented. So that's something that has been a challenge for us, definitely, because the same way artists sometimes don't feel invited to apply for certain things because they don't feel, maybe they don't feel themselves as professional artists for certain grants, or because they are in a different stage of their careers. Sometimes people love the arts, but they don't think that they can have an active role in actually fostering them and creating them. They see themselves only as consumers or users. So that kind of work is still a pending subject for the Queen's Council on the Arts, but I think for everyone in general. But this is how we did it at the time.
For Riser, the selection, the very, very first year or 2 years, we basically had to pick and invite artists because we also didn't know what it was that we would be inviting people to. Really what we started with very, very kind of responsively was someone coming to us and saying, can you produce my show? And Why Not at the time was like a fledgling company that had ever so slightly more success than like an indie company that had nothing. And so people were like, can you help us produce? And then another person was like, can you help me produce? And a third person was like, can you help me produce? And basically we were like, oh shit, we can't scale this. Like, this is not going to work. We can't just keep helping everybody individually. You know what, let's just bring everybody together. And we got out a whiteboard and we're like, is there a way to do this? Like, it was so very much responsive to the need that and the need of individuals in our community who were trying to make shows. And then as the model kind of solidified and we realized what the innovations were, which was basically around sharing resources, sharing audiences, kind of maximizing collective potential. The slogan that we came up with is from independent to interdependent theater. And that innovation, we didn't start with some brilliant idea for that. It was the result of just literally necessity, basically being the mother of that invention. And then eventually what we started doing was saying, we'd like to have committees of juries that are past Riser participants. In our minds, the most important expert was the artists themselves. We were very quickly growing as a company, and then we felt that we were getting out of touch already with what it means to be an indie artist with no consistent operating funding, with no consistent kind of salary or base of money they can rely on. Like, that was already becoming a gap between us and the people we were trying to serve. So we said, you are the experts. Let's just have you pick next year's cohort, and then next year's cohort will pick the following year's cohort. And from that model came out an automatic community kind of inheritance system, I guess, if you will, of indie artists working with other indie artists. And what we did do, where we tipped the scales of those, we created a system for them for how to prioritize or how to evaluate submissions, and gave them some criterion. And the criterion was true to the original vision, which is we didn't want to become another granting funder. So the problems with the granting funders were everyone was like, submit a project proposal, and if you have a great resume, then we'll fund you and your project will get funded and you can do it. And we were going, well, what about all the people who don't have the great resume or don't know what they're making? That was a huge problem at the time for devised theater people, for folks who are making new work. I don't know exactly what the project is going to be. And we were like, let's fund the artists and let's fund the person. And so the criterion was basically, what is your need? And need was very broadly defined by us in terms of historical marginalization, opportunities that you have not had, the kind of need for this place to be the place you produce because other avenues are not open to you. And then what is the feasibility of, are you in the kind of in between? There was a sweet spot. You can't be so unprepared, because someone mentioned this earlier, in terms of the level of kind of capacity that you need in order to be able to take advantage of an opportunity. I'm sure a musician coming into Hot House or Soundcheck has to play an instrument. There's some level of capacity you need to have. But also if you're beyond that level and you already have some experience and significant access, then it's not really, you're not the best person. So that's kind of what we were trying to define need as, or feasibility as. And there was a couple of criteria, and I don't remember now. It's been 2 years and pandemic happened. But the point of it was we were really trying to empower the community that was building around Riser to self-perpetuate its own growth rather than becoming another gatekeeper, because that we were already frustrated with that. That's why we started a company, was, you know, Ravi going, what's with all these gatekeepers? I want an opportunity. Why won't anybody give me an opportunity? And so to make a company that then just becomes a new gatekeeper felt like a really bad solution to that problem.
It's really interesting, the discussion about the decision makers, isn't it? Who are the decision makers? And in some ways, it's quite similar to programming, and who's choosing what gets out there, what gets seen and experienced by people and the audience. And in one way, I've always battled with that as a programmer, because it's a big responsibility. You know, a lot of you here are going to be in a programming position, I'm guessing, as well, if you're working with festivals, and you're going to be a decision maker. You're going to have to make some choices based on some set of criteria that you may or may not have made up yourself. But the whole kind of discussion around the validity of the decision maker is really interesting, because it's easy to forget that other people are making decisions about our everyday lives all the time. And you know, you go into a supermarket to buy a packet of biscuits. Someone at some point has decided which biscuits are going to be on sale for you in that shop. Someone's going to say, right, we're going to have chocolate ones with currency and blah, 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 blah. And you're there, you're faced with that choice. It's a selection probably, but you're going to kind of be faced with something that is put in front of you, knowing that there are a whole lot of other types of biscuits out there, but you just haven't got that choice at the moment. And it's kind of the same when you attend a cultural event that someone's curated or someone's made a choice on your behalf, if you know, of what they think is worth presenting to an audience. And I think most of us buy into that generally when we consume culture, don't we? But when you're coming to working with artists and you're developing programs, that decision making has to be so intensely robust and careful, because so much more depends on it. You know, you're not just making an hour and a half experience for some theatre goers who are going to go and then come back and that's it. That's their experience. We're talking usually here about an experience that's going to stay with an artist for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. You know, it's got to be right for you and for them of what they do. So having really secure decision-making metrics in place is absolutely critical. And I think it does go back to being founded in the need, actually, because if you know what the need is, if you know what the gap in the sector is, and you set about building something around that need, then you're halfway there, because that helps you make those choices about whether that artist has those needs, because you've identified them as priorities.
I love how this conversation really goes into emotions and then structures, systems, cycles, outcomes, money, all of it, time. We could go on, and it's really fabulous. I hope that you're getting some kind of gems and ideas and provocations and things that will help you, as people in the room, to think about how you're collaborating with artists into this longer term and deeper ways of being this intermediary, being what Steve was describing as an invisible enabler into bringing great art to people. And then this whole question of actually who decides what art should be made and presented, and the role of the commissioner, which is like, I think of it as, the question of the audience as well. Like, this is a whole different topic to explore, but audiences are not passive and just consuming art as a product. So with this commissioning scheme, there's also the idea of stepping in and saying, yes, this is what I need, this is what we need, which that's another big question, society as a we. speaking on behalf of other people, or stepping up on behalf of other people, taking that risk somehow and being in the, in the crossfire line somehow. What about we do a quick round of, especially Steve and Danielle, like your quick wins. I'd like to hear, like, if you have a few tips, things that you would love to offer. And perhaps that can also help us to create a bridge towards the networking room. So in a few minutes, we're going to open a few breakout rooms where you can go and chat with Owais, Steve, and Danielle. You'll be able to move around as much as you want. And so before the networking rooms, we'll also have a conclusion from Owais. Owais is our local translator. We didn't find a better name for this role, but it's very much like a contextualizing role, because Owais works in the same field, but it also understands deeply the reality of the Ontario, I'm going to say at large, we're here as an Ontario cohort in general, the Ontario context. And we really want to make sure that what is being shared, especially by international peers, is not perceived as, well, they have the money, they have a different structure, that kind of stuff. What can we hear? What can we take from these experiences that can be applied to our local context? What is alive in what you're hearing? So we'll hear that from Owais to have a little, a final meander into this topic. So Danielle, if you had 1 to 5 tips, I'm not picky on numbers, 1 to 5 tips to share.
Yeah, of course. First, I would say is that people need to be paid for their labor. And that might be a very evident thing to say, but when we create, for example, advisory committees, or when, for example, in the Queen's Council on the Arts case, we invite people in the community to be art commissioners, or when we want the audience to let us know what they want or what they think about the program. If money is going sometimes, not always, but it's going to help for people that might not be engaged with our activity to actually get engaged. Because when people are coming from underrepresented backgrounds, they don't have the time maybe to be part of these conversations, because they have to they live maybe in the Queen's case, they live far from our headquarters, or they don't have the time to participate in these kinds of events. So paying people for the data that we get from them, in large conversations, but also in smaller ways, I think it is important. And in relation to that, I think it is really important that we take a look at our data. That it is important that we collect data and that we take a look at it in terms of demographics, in order to compare that to the communities that we serve in our local context, and see what we are lacking, which people are not in the room. Because opening, if for example there are like public festivals or public institutions in the room, not because it's a public institution, it means that it's open for everyone. Because we might invite everyone to apply, but some people might not be able to apply. For example, a strategy that some people are like doing nowadays is actually paying people for the application. So paying the time, sometimes in the past it used to be people having to pay in order to apply. And now there are some organizations that are paying people for applying, because it takes a lot of time to put together an application. And sometimes people might not do it if they don't think they're going to be successful. And I'm always thinking, and I will end with this, thinking about some barriers that people might have when we are like programming, or when we are thinking about programs, and that sometimes we take for granted, such as, for example, as I said in the beginning, language, right? Just because I am in Madrid, that doesn't mean that everyone here speaks Spanish, right? Or the same way that not because, the same way with so many disabilities. So I think it is important that we keep that. And of course, it is important that we might want someone from the outside to let us know what they see and that we don't see because we are so focused on other things and other parts of our program. And just responding to one question to Andrea, yes, I mean, I think if we are getting some information or kind of feedback from people, we should pay them. Of course, you can pay with money, or maybe you can pay with, I know like even the organization is so difficult sometimes to get people paid, but I think it is important to always find ways of compensation for people to feel invited to engage with arts organizations, institutions, and arts in general. And I will pass it to Steve.
Goodness me, thank you, Daniel. I'll just be really brief. I'll say stay authentic, stay impassioned, and stay awake. Those are my 3 tips. It's what we expect of artists. So I think we should expect that of ourselves when we're supporting them as well.
Say it again, Steve.
Stay authentic, stay impassioned, and stay awake.
Okay, and then thank you so much. Thank you so much to Daniel and Steve for sharing all your learnings, all your emotional labor as well. We're going to pass on to Owais to bring us to a form of processing. This is, just a reflection on everything that we've heard and where to go next in so many ways. And then we'll have time to discuss in more details the questions that are still burning in your minds. We'll go into these networking rooms that you'll be free to move around. I said right now, they're not networking rooms that you have to come back and give any form of explanation that what you talked about. There's no post-its, there's nothing like that. It's just networking, chatting. Over to you, Owais.
Great, more rambling. So I guess to some of the big things that I still come back to listening to both Daniel and Steve and Helen's perspectives and experiences is it's really everything comes back down to what is the need that we are trying to address. And the better attuned you are to the needs of your artists, of your communities, of your own organization, the easier it is to figure out what to do next. I'm also kind of hearing that in general, the needs in the whole world, not surprisingly, a lot of them around changing who it is that has access to different kinds of things, whether it's the opportunity to make art, the opportunity to curate it, the opportunity to experience it. There's something happening there that I feel like is global. It's not just, you in Kingston who's listening right now. It's not just you in Scarborough. It's not just you in Manchester or Madrid. Like there's something globally happening around this idea of trying to change who has access to what. And I think that feeds into an even larger global discussion we're having around who has power in our society and who do we want to have it. And there's definitely different opinions and different approaches to answering that. And I think our role in that is something that, it's exciting to question in terms of the more tangible things that I'm also hearing. Like, I love the question from Jennifer, how do you start these ventures and feed your family? Because I do think that's like the brass tacks of getting into this stuff is really where it gets so complicated and difficult to imagine sometimes or to do. And there's some of the things that we heard is like, there is going to be challenges from public funding sources. Those systems are less responsive. And something you mentioned, Steve, around your funders playing catch up to things you were asking them 10 years ago. Now that I work in university, I can confirm that this is a dynamic of institutions. I think institutions by their very nature, I've been thinking a lot about like, what is it about institutions that they always feel so slow to change? And I think that's by design, because if your university systems, academia were constantly kind of, being upended every time a Trump got elected, and decided that universities were stupid and for the sheep or something, that would be really bad. So they've been designed to withstand change, actually, change in political opinion, change in mindsets. So it actually does take them 10, 20 years to catch up to like, okay, we've decided now this is for sure sticking. We're not going to go back on the climate change thing. We're for sure doing that. Then they can actually implement, because I think an institution that is changing all the time is actually like not sustainable. It wouldn't be an institution anymore. And that, I think, recognizing that from the perspective of folks who are building institutions, which is most people here, with much smaller organizations or companies, size can be your enemy. Some of the best work you will be able to do in your lives, I feel like, is when you're small, when you're nimble, when you are free of institutional expectations. You spoke at the very beginning, Steve, about your own expectations of your organization, your community's expectations of your organization, the funders' expectations, which comes with size and comes with history, is those traps. And there's a freedom in being new and being unencumbered by the limitations of your own history. And with that, I think there's the challenge of, yes, how do you feed your family? I don't have a good answer, sorry, Jennifer, but the opportunity is that you can take risks that is much harder for even the Manchester Jazz Festival to take, because they have a lot more people that they have to answer to before they can try a crazy new thing. And kudos to them for continuing to push that and continuing to stay engaged in that exploration. And same with the Queen's Council. Like, the idea that a funder took on this project is mind-boggling to me for the level of innovation that it demonstrates. And it's very interesting to me that, like, it was a private foundation that funded the first go, and that, in my own fundraising experience, like, I've had a meeting with a bank, and then 2 weeks later we got 6 figures, and then I've had the same project funded by Canadian Heritage 2 years later. Like, the timelines of public and private are just so different, and the appetite for a new thing, an untested thing, can be so different depending on where you're going. So maybe that's another thing for us to get into, is like, where is the right place to take your brilliant new ideas? Is it a waste of time banging your head against a public funder wall until you have more demonstrated evidence and track record and enough of a case to make there? And then defining success, I just think that is so key. Defining success on your own terms, but also defining success at all, just doing that and having some way of measuring your own progress, so that if you're doing it, the things that you want to do, because it's very easy to get lost in the, I think, idea of the thing rather than what was the thing we were trying to do. Then are we actually achieving that? Because a thing that I do see a lot of is like, oh, the thing we're trying to do is put on a festival every year, which is not the same as saying the thing we're trying to do every year is increase access for artists who have never had opportunity to play music at this kind of stage. You know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of organizations the thing we're trying to do is stay the same and stay alive just because we need to exist. It's just an assumed fact. And that question, I think, is a big one for people to continue to grapple with, is what is the thing you actually set out to do, and are you still doing that, and how do you measure that? And with that, I will stop rambling and pass it back over to you, Fanny.
Thank you so much, Owais. Thanks for the rambling, because this is what we need. We need to unfold. We need to look into the cracks and the shadows, of everything we do, to find actually these purposes. What do we really want to do? A festival or change the world? And we will have time to talk about that in the breakout rooms, in the networking section of our session today. Just to announce, next we have another spotlight, which will be about collaborating with society on the 13th of April. Registrations are open. It's just like today. It's informal, very conversational. We'll have people from the UK talking a lot about community engagement, from France talking about the ecological transition, especially for festivals. And our local translator will be Kevin Matthew Wong, who is around today. So you can register. And speaking of measuring success, we have a feedback form, and we're very, 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 very grateful for the time that you will take to tell us what was good for you, what could be better, and what more do you want. It's really, really important. With this, we want to pass on to, I want to pass on to Stephanie to bring the formal session to a close. So we have another slide.
There we go. Yes, thank you, Fanny. And thank you to our guest speakers today, our co-hosts for the session. I have added the survey link to the chat. So if you could open it up and have it ready to fill out after you leave our networking portion later on today, that would be greatly appreciated. And before we move on to that, I just wanted to thank our guest speakers again for sharing their experiences and insights into this topic, and to our participants for being so engaged. And just as a reminder that this project is made possible through generous support of our funder, Canadian Heritage, and our project partners, Kingston Arts Council, City of Sudbury, City of Toronto, Ottawa Festivals Network, and the Ontario Culture Days. And we extend our deep thanks to them.